No case is worth this. Quit! The devil knows you're on the case. Oh, I hate it. Welcome to a video I've been meaning to film for a while, but I've been scared. I'm not a scary movie person, but it's been asked and I'm trying to give the people what they want. If you're new here, my name's Leeja. I'm a real-life lawyer on a mission to demystify the law and how it affects your everyday life. Spooky season is upon us and it's the time now I'm gonna react to the exorcism of Emily Rose. We got our pup cam down in the corner. Moira is fast asleep and snoring, so if you hear those snorts throughout the video, please don't be alarmed. Now you can actually get a bird's eye view of the action with this pub cam. You're welcome. I don't know what to say. Really, it's a movie based on a true story, and most of it is just set in a courtroom with very spooky flashbacks. Laura Linney plays a private attorney who is representing the priest and the archdiocese, and the priest is accused of negligent homicide for the death of Emily Rose during the exorcism. How accurate is it to real life? Can being possessed be a cause of death? I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's watch. I'm scared. Before we get into this, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Trade. When I tell you that running out of coffee is the worst thing that can happen in a morning, man oh man, it can really get your whole day started off on the wrong foot. No more! With Trade, you can get freshly roasted coffee delivered right to your door on your preferred schedule. With Trade, you can discover new coffees from some of the nation's best local roasters. Trade matches you with your own personal selection of coffee, and then it ships straight to your door from the roastery itself, so you know it's at peak freshness. So here's how it works. You take a quiz and you answer questions about how you like your coffee, and then Trade will curate matches just for you. Then it gets shipped right to your door. You choose your own delivery frequency and it'll appear at your doorstep, so you never have to run out again. And then step 3, you rate and repeat. You rate your matches so that Trade can continue to send you the best coffees tailored to your tastes. I'm currently drinking Sparrow's Coffee's Dirty Bird blend. It is like very rich and dark and smoky and delicious and exactly what you want during spooky season. What's great too is that Trade will guarantee that you'll like your first bag of coffee, and if you don't, they'll ship you your next bag of coffee for free. My viewers will get their first bag of coffee free when they sign up using the link in the description down below. Clicking that link will take you to a quiz so that Trade can match you with the best coffee for you. And free shipping is also included. So thanks so much again to Trade Coffee for sponsoring today's video. Let's get into it. Let me say here though, I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer, okay? Nothing that I say should ever be construed as legal advice, and you should always seek the advice of a licensed attorney before making any legal decisions.
Can I buy you a drink, Mr. Thomas? He makes an excellent martini.
Just water for me, please. The judge thinks we should offer your client a new plea agreement. Apparently she feels the community might be better served without this trial. If it were up to me, you'd get no deal at all. If you have compassion for your client, counselor, you'll persuade him to accept this. Charges reduced to reckless endangerment. 12 months in a county jail.
I will say they would not just be chatting about this in this bar like this. Like, it wouldn't be one side unilaterally coming up and being like, hey, the judge told me to work on this plea deal. That would be like a thing that the judge would like speak to both attorneys, both sides on. This isn't something where the judge is like, hey, I need you to do this thing. Would you just tell the other lawyer quick? While you're at it, just tell the other side for me. Wouldn't be happening in this bar, though. I will say the alcoholism, pretty accurate to private law. I drank a lot back when I was a private attorney. How else is one supposed to blow off that kind of steam? Yikes.
This is a photograph taken of her on the day that she died.
I don't think that photo would be allowed into evidence. Or at the very least, if I was Laura Linney, I would have objected to that. I would argue that it would be overly prejudicial. Basically, under Rule 403 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, which have been adopted by most states, though we don't know what state that this is taking place in, I don't think. It seems rural Midwestern, like a Missouri, perhaps. Rule 403 allows for the exclusion of evidence, even if it's relevant, if the probative value would be outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. What does this mean? Okay, sure, it might be relevant because we're talking about this girl's murder and here's a picture of her dead. However, I would say its probative value, that is, what it can bring to the table to prove that the priest was the one that killed her, that he was negligent in her death, I think would be outweighed by the prejudice against the priest by showing this photograph. Meaning that these jurors are seeing this like really horrific photo and they're gonna want to blame someone. They're gonna feel a lot of emotion about like, oh my God, it's horrible. Look at that photo. He is a monster, without it actually proving that he did anything wrong. You know what I mean? So we wanna make sure that the evidence that we're putting in before the jury isn't going to prejudice them against the defendant without actually like showing anything real. Like to show that she had died, they call in a coroner to confirm her death. You don't need to show this picture to get at the same thing. And that's far less prejudicial to have a coroner testify than it is to show this type of photograph. And these types of photographs, crime scenes, bodies, a lot of times will be excluded because of the prejudicial effect that they would have on the jury.
Is the defense prepared to make its opening statement?
Your Honor, I would like to reserve my opening statement until the presentation of the defense's case.
As is your privilege. Prosecution may begin.
So in some states, this is accurate. You can reserve your opening statement until after the prosecution has presented its case. Again, we don't know what state we're in, but apparently she could do that here in this made-up state. And determining whether or not to do this is just going to depend on your strategy in the case. Maybe she wants to see what the prosecution's going to say so that she can formulate her argument or address what they say in her opening statements. Again, this is based on a true story, but the true story actually happened in Germany. It was involving a woman named Anneliese Michel and the exorcisms that were done on her that led to her death. So I don't know German law. I am an American, if you can't tell. I do not study German law, so I don't know how it works over there. But here, there are states where that's allowed.
Did you ask Emily why she had stopped filling her Gambitroll prescriptions?
Yes. She said that Father Moore had suggested she stop taking the drug.
And what, in your medical opinion, was the direct result of Father Moore's suggestion?
I firmly believe that Father Moore's suggestion killed her.
Objection, Your Honor. The witness
to
is
her
asserting
death.
outrageous conclusions based on pure hearsay evidence. You said you observed a possible epileptic focus in the temporal lobe. Doesn't this imply that what you observed may not have been an epileptic focus?
Yes, that's also possible.
Was she experiencing symptoms typical of epilepsy?
Not typical, no.
Are they typical indications of any other conditions, say, for example, psychosis?
Yes, I would say that's correct.
But isn't psychosis an entirely different medical condition from epilepsy?
So I think that was a valid objection for her to have made. I mean, he's making a conclusion that I don't think would be based in his medical expertise. So he's called to the witness stand not as just a fact witness, but as an expert witness. So he is a medical doctor testifying as to her epilepsy. And then he's saying, well, I think that the reason why she died, or that him taking her off Gambitroll directly led to her death, not necessarily a medical opinion that he could make, given that he didn't see the body as far as we know. He's not the coroner. He didn't treat her. At this point, he didn't see her during or after the exorcism, so I think that it's pretty valid for her to have said that he's making a conclusion based on, like, nothing. And I think on her part, her questioning of this witness was good. I mean, the defense's role is to poke holes in the prosecution's story. Moira. With an expert witness especially, she'll want to be questioning his credibility, questioning his conclusions, looking at the methods that he used to get there, and looking at his past, his credibility. Where has he worked? What has he done in the past? Have there been any other trials during which he has testified that the judge ultimately threw out his testimony? These are all things that she should have looked into before this trial started and then questioned him on. Usually before an expert testifies, there's what's called a Daubert motion, a Daubert motion, depending on where you are in the country. And you look at the qualifications of the expert, you look at whether they are using, in their expert opinion, accepted methods in the field, methods that have been peer reviewed. An expert will submit a report, and then the other side will have a chance to object to the report, either to the contents or to the expert's expertise generally. So like there would have been some back and forth here where she could have kind of dug into this guy's background or into his expert opinion and objected to it or have been prepared for it here. But I think that her questioning of like, okay, well, is there any other potential that it could have been? Like it could have not been epilepsy, and him saying, well, I guess that's true. That's good to at least like bring a little bit of doubt into the minds of jurors. I'll remind you that in a criminal case, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove that the defendant did the crime, and they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. So if the defense is able to put just even a little bit of doubt in the minds of jurors, that should be enough to keep their client, the defendant, out of jail.
Ethan Thomas is using the medical aspects of this case as ammunition, and I have to be prepared for his attacks. So with what little time we have, I think we need to focus on your defense. Now, what I need from you is more information about Emily's condition, the specific details of how it progressed, after the dorm room episode.
She would have been asking these questions before the trial ever began. Like, right when she got him as a client, she would have been like, tell me about Emily. What were her conditions like? How did they progress as you were treating her? If it's the basis of the accusation against him, like, this would have all been stuff she would have gathered before the trial. And I can't really tell if, I think this timeline, like, they're doing flashbacks while they're on the stand, but I think this is happening real time along with the trial. So, like, she's seeing the prosecution's witness and then being like, well, I guess I should probably ask him some questions. Like, this is not how it would happen. She would have had this witness list ahead of time. She would have had at least a basic understanding of the direction that the prosecution was going in with their argument so that she could prepare the defense. And it seems like she's just prepping on the fly here, which, not entirely accurate. And she would have prepped him if he was gonna be on the witness stand with, like, questions. She would have developed cross-examination questions for all the prosecution's witnesses. Lawyers do think on the fly a little bit if they need to kind of tweak the questions or their general idea of where they were going to take a witness during trial, but they're not just like standing up and being like, maybe I'll ask this question and just kind of like winging it. Especially when it's someone like her where she's got a ton of pressure on her from the partner who's like, don't screw this up. The diocese, they want us to win.
Emily?
Laura, get out of there! Oh, God. No case is worth this. No case is worth this. Quit! The devil knows you're on the case. Oh, I hate it. It made my skin crawl. No!
Dr. Briggs, in your opinion, if Emily had continued with her medication, would she be alive today?
Absolutely.
I feel like that's something she should have objected to. I feel like that's conjecture again. I mean, he likely would have submitted a report of some sort that she would have read, but I feel like unless he saw Emily during the exorcism, which it doesn't seem like there were these doctors actually treating her at this point, then maybe he could have made that call, but at this point it seems like conjecture and also maybe verging on legal opinion, saying that the priest caused her death. He's not the coroner, like, I don't know. I feel like that's a bit of a conclusion to have drawn based on questionable background knowledge.
Doctor, you testified that Gambitroll could have controlled Emily's condition.
Gambitroll would have controlled her epileptic seizures, which were the root cause of her psychosis.
But wasn't Emily still experiencing psychotic symptoms even after she started taking the medication?
Yes, because Gambitroll has a cumulative effect. It takes time to build up in the patient's system.
So you assume that Gambitroll would have helped her, but you don't know that it
It's
would.
a reasonable assumption, but no, of course, I can't be certain.
Don't worry about today. We're doing fine. We're getting creamed. I cannot believe I walked right into that. If we don't find a doctor to testify that Emily wasn't epileptic or schizophrenic or schizoepileptic, we're gonna lose.
We're getting creamed. Like, that's something I haven't heard since the 90s. Listen, she would have known about this expert before the trial began. We already talked about this. She would have gotten some sort of report. She would have some sort of idea. This is not surprise witnesses on the stand. That's not how this works. You have to submit your witness list to the other side before trial begins. She would have looked for an expert to refute the prosecution's experts before trial began. She would have known this expert was taking the stand, known that he had come up with epileptic psychosis, whatever the hell they called it. She would have known that he came up with that already, so she would have already prepared. She would know where the prosecution was going with this, because she would have looked into this guy's background, you know?
It's by an anthropologist. It's about contemporary cases of possession, mostly in the third world.
Of course, people there are still primitive and superstitious.
Maybe. Maybe they see possession for what it really is. Maybe we've taught ourselves not to see it. I'm saying maybe we shouldn't just try to invalidate the prosecution's case by punching holes in the medical approach. Maybe we should also try to validate the alternative. I've got 3 articles by the anthropologist who wrote this book. She approaches the subject of possession from a scientific perspective and doesn't try to debunk it.
You want me to track her down?
Yeah. Keep looking for a medical expert to refute Dr. Briggs, but send the case file to this Dr. Sadira Adani.
Like I said, she would have already been searching for these experts and found this expert and called her. Like, you can't just be like, hey, you're an expert on this. Here's a case file. You want to testify tomorrow? Unbelievable. But listen, she did talk about, you know, either poking holes in the defense's argument or trying to support a different argument. And that is kind of what the defense has to think about. Do we want to just poke holes in what the prosecution is saying just enough to get doubt in the minds of jurors? Or do we also want to present our own witnesses to corroborate our side of the story? Sometimes both is the right strategy. Sometimes the right strategy is to just poke holes. That's why sometimes the prosecution will lay out a 3-week case and then the defense will lay out a day or two of testimony tops and then rest. But again, she would have called all these people. She would have looked for all these experts. She would have figured this out before trial. She wouldn't be doing this research like on the fly during trial. Also, that third world comment, yikes.
Father Moore simply tried to help Emily in a different way, using an approach that he, Emily, and her family firmly believed was her only chance for relief.
She's really saying, like, he had a very sincere belief. Sure. However, I don't know that having a sincere belief necessarily equates to him not having been negligent. Let's talk about negligence and negligent homicide. I don't know what state we're in, but many states don't have a negligent homicide statute per se. Usually when talking about murder or the death of someone, there's murder and then there's manslaughter. Murder requires intent, so the person has to have intentionally killed the victim, whereas manslaughter, there has to have been some wrongdoing on the part of the defendant, but it doesn't have to have been intentional. So if the defendant was negligent, therefore they could be found guilty of manslaughter. So in this case, Father Moore would have had to have acted with criminal negligence in order to be found guilty of this crime. Criminal negligence is typically defined as the defendant failing to be aware of a substantial risk that a reasonable person would have been aware of in this situation, and that this risk deviates substantially from the expected standard of care that a reasonable person would have exercised in a similar situation. Basically, they acted completely unreasonably and they should have known that harm would occur as a result of their actions. It's kind of a gray definition, but the basic thing to understand is that it does not require intent, but it does require asking what the reasonable person would have done if they had been in the same or similar situation. Not what a reasonable priest with a sincere belief in God and possession would have done, but what a reasonable person would have done. And that's what the prosecution has to prove, that he acted unreasonably. Maybe, maybe not. That's something for the jury to determine. So her talking about like he had a sincere belief, he did everything in his power, like kind of goes to like he was acting reasonably, he took precautions, etc., but like his sincere belief in God or demons or whatever doesn't really hold much water here.
Mr. Rose, are you aware that catatonic rigidity, specifically a locking up of the joints of the body, is a known symptom of psychosis?
No, I haven't studied these things.
I feel like that's a weird thing to ask someone who's not an expert witness. I feel like an objection would have been appropriate there because he's basically trying to tell the jury these symptoms that are typical based on the DSM by asking a non-expert questions about it, just to like get it before the jury, even though he clearly isn't an expert and wouldn't know these things. I don't really know what he's getting at here. Objection!
Hypersensitives are born different from everyone else. They can have visions of the future or see the dead, and sometimes be uniquely susceptible to invasion by an entity that is alien to them.
Objection!
On what grounds?
How about silliness, Your Honor? This testimony is beyond ridiculous. Visions of the future are seeing the
belief
dead.
systems are shared by millions, perhaps billions of people in the world. Her expertise is directly relevant to the issues in this
Let's bring in
case.
a witch doctor to sift through some monkey bones while we're at it.
Now we have a witness who has spent her career studying the defense's alternative explanation. An exorcism expert, if you will. I think we'll hear what she has to say.
I agree. You don't have to be a medical doctor to be an expert in a case. There are many different types of experts, and this woman has a background and a career and a CV, has studied in a generally accepted area, it appears. As long as she's got something to back up her expertise, like a lot of times they could be found to be valid experts. Also, again, all of these objections would have happened before trial because she should have found this expert before trial, and the prosecution would have known about this expert before trial and would have been able to object to her or her reports or what she was bringing to the table.
Ever since the technology has been available, exorcists have used tape recorders to authenticate the ritual and provide a record for later review.
I offer into evidence this cassette recorder and audio tape as defense
Objection,
exhibits A and B.
People were not made aware of the existence of this tape until late last night.
Neither were we, Your Honor. This tape is new evidence that just came into our possession yesterday evening.
You mean this tape was not given to you by your client?
No, Your Honor. We received it from a reluctant witness.
So it's pretty rare for evidence to just be last minute entered into evidence like this. If there's like exigent circumstances or something that's just been found, then maybe there'd be an exception. However, here she would have known about the existence of this evidence ahead of time because her client should have told her, hey, I made a tape during the exorcism. That would probably be helpful information for you to have. I don't know if just springing it on the trial like this would fly, because she knew about this beforehand. It's not like she just found out about the tape or there's been a new development of any sort. You know what I mean?
You told me you'd talk him out of testifying. Instead, you put on a freak show with tape-recorded demons and a dead girl speaking in tongues.
I swore an oath to do what's best for my client.
Spare me the law school pieties, Bruner. You cashed in your conscience at the door. You've screwed it up beyond all repair. But the Archdiocese feels that replacing you now would only draw more unnecessary attention to the trial. But just so we're clear, Bruner, if you put that priest on the stand again, I will fire you.
Oh, Laurie, you don't deserve it. First of all, it's the priest's constitutionally protected right for him to take the stand in his own defense, so, like, I don't know why this partner's putting this much pressure on her, because she had to let him testify if it's what he wanted to do. She works, again, like she said, she works for the priest. Even though the Archdiocese is paying for it, like, her client, who she's defending, is the priest. She needs to do what he wants of her. That's how it works. Also, I don't think a single partner can fire another partner. It's a partnership. They're all at the same level. They're different tiers, like she's a newer partner and there are senior partners, but they kind of all have to like meet and make a decision before a partner's let go. I don't think it's just up to this guy.
Why do you think God allowed this to happen?
Objection. What can possibly be the
Your
relevance
Honor,
of that question?
Father
It's
Moore's
sheer speculation.
belief in this matter is crucial in establishing his and Emily's understanding of her condition. And that mutual understanding is paramount in determining whether Father Moore was, in fact, negligent.
I'm going to allow it.
Your Honor, you're not really going to let someone testify in a court of law about why God would allow the death of a young girl?
The objection has been overruled.
Well, first of all, you shouldn't talk back to a judge once they've made their determination on an objection. Looks bad. But also, state of mind not critical here. Not critical, because we're talking about negligence. If we were talking about intent, if this were a murder case, we were wondering his intent, state of mind, also known as mens rea in lawyer speak, would be relevant. Here, though, not relevant. Again, we're talking about negligence. There is a standard of care that doesn't have to do with his mental state. It's what would a non-negligent, a reasonable person have done in this situation. So state of mind doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter if he had a firmly held belief in God and demons and exorcisms. The question is, did he deviate from the standard of care that a reasonable person would have taken under these situations? So mental state, not relevant. Wrong!
Now, for the most important question, is Father Richard Moore guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of negligent homicide? Did he, in fact, neglect Emily's needs in such a way that her death is now on his hands? No, that is not a fact. It is not a fact that Emily was epileptic. It is not a fact that she was psychotic. Facts leave no room for possibilities.
All right, Laura. Okay, listen. The central question is not what she just... The central question is, was he acting reasonable? Was he being reasonable in his treatment of her? Did he deviate so much from the reasonable standard of care that it led to Emily Rose's death? That's the central question. But she is getting at an important fact, and that is the idea of reasonable doubt. Can these jurors be certain that his behavior was negligent such that it led to her death? Maybe not. She wants them to believe that they can't be sure of that there's enough doubt in their minds that they can't say for certain that he should be found guilty, because if there is any reasonable doubt, then he shouldn't be found guilty. And that's kind of what she's getting at here, but like, the law is getting a little bit lost in the dramatics.
In the case of the People versus Father Richard Moore, we, the jury,
find the defendant guilty of negligent homicide.
Father Moore requested at the start of the trial that if found guilty, he would be sentenced immediately.
Very well. Do you understand this sentence which has been found against you?
Yes, Your Honor.
And do you understand the gravity of this crime, that you may, under the law, be sentenced to a term of up to 10 years?
Yes, I do.
Are there any statements you would like to make before I impose this sentence?
No, Your Honor.
Very well. Excuse me, Your Honor. But the jury would like to make a recommendation. We recommend a sentence of time served. I'll accept that. You are guilty, Father Moore. And you are free to go.
As far as I know, there's not any state in the US where the jury can recommend a sentence like this. They do have juries recommend like death sentences. That's something separate. That's like a separate trial that happens for death sentencing. But like, I don't think that the jury can just kind of recommend like, hey, we think that he should get this. Usually that's up to a judge's discretion. Again, states do things differently, but my experience is at the federal level, and at the federal level, when a judge is considering a sentence, there is time taken to think about it, and usually probation will put together a pre-sentencing report if that gets ordered, which is basically just a report that looks at the defendant's background, their past criminal convictions or accusations, their childhood, their mental health, their physical health, and it'll put it all into one big report for the judge to take so that they can make a determination based on the whole person that has committed this crime. They also look at sentencing guidelines, which are, at least federally, there's a Sentencing Guidelines Commission that puts together this giant book every year that gives judges guidelines as to every single separate crime, how to determine how long the person should be in prison. She also has the statute she can look at. So the statute says, according to her, that he can get up to 10 years. So she can't give him more than 10 years. But then the sentencing guidelines and the pre-sentencing report will help her kind of figure out how much time to give him. And the sentencing guidelines will say like, okay, if the crime is especially heinous, then he should get more time. If he has no prior criminal offenses, then he should get less time. Things like that to kind of determine, okay, where should this fall? How many months or years should this person get? So there's considerations to be made. She did give him a chance to speak on his own behalf, to make a statement at sentencing. That is something that criminal defendants do get. They can make a statement at their sentencing hearing. However, there is also the potential that victims can stand up and make statements. That is their time to stand up and to say their piece to the defendant, which didn't happen here. Also, at least in my experience, judges take a little bit more time to be like, do you understand the crime against you? Do you understand next steps? Do you understand what is happening? And like just trying to make sure that the defendant understands what's going on. Theoretically, we want to protect a defendant's rights, even if they're found guilty of a crime, so that we're not committing like cruel and unusual punishment or other things that are against the Constitution, you know? I don't think that something like this would ever actually happen. Usually a sentencing hearing is set at least a few days later after the conclusion of a trial, but sometimes even longer. However, the final sentencing is accurate. Again, this took place in Germany. It's the case of Anneliese Michel and the priests who performed 62 exorcisms on her. She eventually died due to malnutrition because she quit eating, and they were found guilty of negligent homicide, and they were originally sentenced to 2 years in prison, which was then lowered to 3 years of probation and no prison time. And in the movie, they talk about how she had this vision of the Virgin Mary telling her that she should sacrifice herself to like tell the people and let them know that, you know, God exists or whatever, and she accepts and decides to stay in her demon-possessed body to try to like spread the word of God. I don't know if that actually happened in any of this, but I did read that the actual gravesite of Anneliese Michel is a place of pilgrimage now where people will come, and it is in Bavaria, Germany, if you'd ever like to visit. Look at Moira, she's just falling right off her little bed over there. Sweet girl in a sweet diaper. All right, a little palate cleanser for you, a little pup cam to round out this video. I hope that you found this entertaining. If you did, consider giving it a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. I certainly did not enjoy myself here, but I hope that you did. Comment down below if there are other movies or TV shows that you want me to react to in the future. Thanks so much again to Trade Coffee for sponsoring today's video. I hope you have a lovely spooky season. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye!